Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this episode of All Things Lean with your host Madhulika Rajahan. In our last episode, we talked about principles of universal design, creating accessible websites. In this episode, we will talk about the same principle a little further. In our last video, we have discussed the following three principles: equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use. We will discuss the next four in today's video. Principle 4 talks about perceptible information. The design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or user's sensory abilities. Information is critical to users, whether it's communicated via text, pictures, audio, or videos. Make sure the information is easy to digest and access. When you incorporate this principle in your design, start with your users. You can figure out how best to present information by considering users with disabilities, such as those with vision or hearing impairments. Guidelines for perceptible information can be: use different modes, that is pictorial, verbal, tactile, for redundant presentations of essential information. Provide adequate contrast between essential information and its surroundings. Maximize legibility of essential information. Differentiate elements in a way that can be described, that is, make it easy to give instructions or directions. Provide compatibility with a variety of techniques or devices that people with sensory limitations use. Multimedia requires multi-sensory experiences, especially videos. People with hearing problems or language barriers have difficulty consuming information from videos. You can remove these barriers by providing video transcriptions or subtitles. Video transcriptions and subtitles add an alternative channel. They allow users to consume words and information from the video without relying on hearing. Designing with accessibility in mind can be a win-win situation for both the company and the users, just as it did for TED. TED is a non-profit organization which is dedicated to spreading videos and ideas via short power talks. The talks are usually 18 minutes or less and are often uploaded as videos on their websites. In order to reach and help as many users as possible, TED's website provides subtitles and transcriptions for their online videos. It also provides the option to select a language. It's a huge service for the hearing impaired users, and it is a great service for everybody else who prefers to read instead of viewing and hearing the videos. In turn, it's also good for TED as they reach more users and increase their popularity. When designing for accessibility, this is most often the case. It's a win-win situation for both the users and the companies or organizations we design for. Principle 5 talks about tolerance for errors. The design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. Hans-Peter Durr, a German physicist, says human beings should only use technology which, if the worst case happens, it leads to an acceptable damage. Definitely, nuclear energy is not in that category. I want an industrial world where people are allowed to make errors, because human creativity has to do with being allowed to make errors. We want an error-friendly environment. Errors are inevitable among humans. Hence the adage, to her is human. While we are not designing for a nuclear technology, we should design for an error-friendly environment. Universal design aims to design for all users, as well as design in anticipation for different environments and users' action. This principle pushes you to think beyond the screen and how the system and user will interact with each other. Guidelines for tolerance for error. Arrange elements so as to minimize hazards and errors. Most used elements, most accessible, with hazardous elements eliminated, isolated or shielded. Provide warnings about hazards and errors. Provide fail-safe features. Discourage unconscious action in tasks that require vigilance. An example of the same can be to reduce submission error with form validation. Form validation minimizes and prevents user errors. There are three ways to validate form inputs. Input form validation, making sure the user has used the correct format for an input field. For example, the email address input field should have a format start with a string of alphabets or a letter, followed by an ampersand and an email domain name. Data validation. Check to make sure whether the data the user entered is in the correct context. For example, many hotel reservation systems need check-in dates to be no earlier than the current date. Server validation. Input format validation and data validation are applied to a specific input field. Server validation sends all the data of a form to the server and checks for a current data relationship. For example, a simple login form would use server validation to check whether the username and password are correct. Principle 6 talks about low physical effort. The design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum of fatigue. We may not first associate physical efforts with using the web. Anyone can easily just sit down and use a mouse, but technology is now integrated and ubiquitous in places. Many people are using their computers for 8 or more hours to perform tasks at work. The amount of time we spend in our computers is taxing on our bodies. In fact, people with physical disabilities have even more difficulty with using the web than normal users do. For example, those with mobility issues may have a hard time moving the mouse to a desired target. This is why designing for low physical efforts is vital to bear in mind whenever we work. Some of the guidelines for low physical efforts can be: allow users to maintain a neutral body position, use reasonable operating forces, minimize repetitive actions, minimize sustained physical effort. Keyboard shortcuts reduce the need to move from the keyboard to the mouse for simple tasks. Most browsers such as Chrome, Firefox, and Safari provide keyboard shortcuts to perform tasks such as copy, Ctrl+C, and paste, Ctrl+V. You can design superb interactive experiences by adding appropriate keyboard shortcuts. They will improve the navigation and make websites easier to use for all users. Asana is a web-based project management platform. It allows teams to track and manage work items. Asana has a rich set of keyboard shortcuts. These shortcuts reduce the mouse usage and minimize repetitive action. Principle 7. Size and space for approach and use. Appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use regardless of user's body size posture, or mobility. For product designers, their focus is on form factors such as the size of and space involved with the product. As digital designers, our focus is less on form factors but more on what is on the screen. This is a short-sighted mindset because it is important to think outside of the screen and consider our users' environment as well, especially as users view websites not only on desktops but also increasingly on mobile devices as well. As you can see, most of the guidelines for the principle apply more to the product and environmental design. Nevertheless, we can still look at the principle and its guidelines so as to create a universal design website, one for both desktop and mobile devices. Guidelines for size and space for approach and use. Provide a clear line of sight to important elements for any seated or standing user. Make reach to all components comfortable for any seated or standing user. Accommodate variations in hand and grip size. Provide adequate space for the use of assistive devices or personal assistance. An example of the same can be to consider the target area of your website when it is on mobile devices. On a desktop, a user interacts with a website via a small pointer on the screen. On a mobile device, a user interacts with a website using his or her index finger or a thumb. A small target area can be a problem on mobile devices because it is more difficult to select with precision. According to an MIT Touch Lab study in 2003, the average size of a human adult index finger is 1.6 to 2 centimeters. Converting that, we have approximately 60 to 76 pixels on a digital screen. So, the next time you design for mobile, make sure your touch target areas take the human physical factors into consideration. So, what is the importance of universal design? The most important international work on accessibility is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, or CRPD. We refer to it as the Convention by lawmakers and the disability community. It is the first major human rights treaty for the 21st century, and it protects the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. It calls for the removal of environmental and attitudinal barriers in physical and digital spaces. The United Nations adopted the CRPT in 2007. As of July 2015, as many as 157 countries have ratified the convention and 159 countries had signed it. The convention listed universal design as one of the general obligations to protect the rights of persons with disabilities, to undertake or promote research and development of universally designed goods, services, equipment, and facilities, as defined in Article 2 of the present convention, which should require the minimum possible adaptation and the least cost to meet the specific needs of a person with disabilities, to promote their availability and use, and to promote universal design in the development of standards and guidelines. This is according to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 4, which was written in 2006. Creating accessible products can be a challenging task. Sometimes we as designers do not know where to start. Universal design is a solid approach to design because the 7 principles help us consider the needs of all users in general. Universal design benefits everyone, not just the aging population or people with disabilities. The principle of universal design is a great resource for us to use when we want to design accessible websites, once we serve and cater to as many users as possible. These principles will help guide your design process. Thus, you should incorporate them into any project you do from a very beginning. In today's video, the part 2 in the series, we have discussed the following 4 principles: perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space approach and use. In addition to the 3 discussed in the earlier video: equitable use, flexibility in use, and simple and intuitive use. With this, we come to an end to this episode of All Things Lean. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment in the comment section on what you'd like to hear more. Until next time, this is your host, Madhulika Rajahan, signing off. Have a wonderful day ahead.